Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Fort Harrison, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder and nervous energy coursing through her veins. At 22, she had made the difficult decision to join the military after struggling to find direction in her civilian life. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training facility as dozens of new recruits gathered in formation, all wearing the same uncertain expressions. What made Sarah different from her fellow trainees wasn't immediately obvious to most people. Hidden beneath her regulation long sleeves was a tattoo that covered most of her left forearm. It wasn't the typical butterfly or flower that many young women chose. Instead, it was an intricate military insignia surrounded by detailed scrollwork and dates. The tattoo had been expensive, taking multiple sessions to complete, and it held deep personal meaning for her. Sarah had gotten the tattoo 2 years earlier to honor her older brother Marcus, who had been killed in action while serving overseas. Marcus had been her hero, her protector, and her best friend. When he died, Sarah felt lost and angry at the world. The tattoo was her way of keeping his memory alive and honoring his service. The insignia was an exact replica of the badge Marcus had earned during his time in special operations. During the first week of basic training, Sarah was careful to keep her tattoo covered. She had heard stories about drill sergeants who didn't appreciate recruits with visible ink, and she didn't want to draw any unnecessary attention to herself. The training was already challenging enough without adding extra complications. Staff Sergeant Rivera was Sarah's primary drill instructor, a tough woman in her 30s who had served multiple tours overseas. She had a reputation for being fair but demanding, expecting nothing less than complete dedication from her trainees. Rivera noticed that Sarah always wore long sleeves, even during physical training when other recruits had switched to regulation t-shirts. "Martinez," Rivera called out during morning inspection. "Why are you still wearing long sleeves when the temperature is already hitting 80 degrees? Sarah stood at attention, her eyes focused straight ahead. "No excuse, drill sergeant." Rivera studied her for a moment. She had seen enough recruits to know when someone was hiding something, but she decided not to press the issue immediately. There would be time to address whatever Sarah was concealing later. As the days progressed, Sarah's fellow trainees began to notice her unusual commitment to long sleeves. During particularly intense training exercises in the sweltering heat, while everyone else was grateful for any relief they could get, Sarah continued to cover her arms completely. Private Johnson, a loudmouthed recruit from Texas, started making comments. "What's the matter, Martinez? You got some embarrassing birthmark or something? Maybe a tattoo of your ex-boyfriend's name." The other trainees laughed, but Sarah ignored the comments and focused on her training. She excelled in most areas, showing particular aptitude for marksmanship and tactical exercises. Her dedication and natural leadership abilities didn't go unnoticed by the instructors, but neither did her secretive behavior about her arms. During their third week of training, the group was assigned to outdoor exercises that would last several days. The heat was becoming unbearable, and several trainees had already been treated for heat exhaustion. Medical personnel were monitoring everyone closely, and they had strict orders to ensure all recruits stayed properly hydrated and didn't overheat. Corporal Williams, one of the assistant instructors, pulled Sarah aside after noticing her struggling during a particularly demanding drill. "Martinez, you're going to give yourself heat stroke if you keep wearing those long sleeves. Whatever you're hiding under there can't be worth endangering your health and your military career." Sarah's resolve was weakening. The heat was affecting her performance, and she could see the concern in Corporal Williams' eyes. She had grown to respect her instructors and didn't want to let them down, but she was also terrified of the potential consequences if they discovered her tattoo. That evening, as Sarah sat in her bunk writing a letter to her parents, she made a decision. She would tell Staff Sergeant Rivera about the tattoo the next morning. She would explain the meaning behind it and hope that her honesty would be met with understanding rather than punishment. Unknown to Sarah, her story was about to take an unexpected turn. Base Commander Colonel Harrison had been observing the training exercises from a distance, evaluating both the recruits and the instructors. He had served in the same unit as Sarah's brother Marcus, and had been following her progress with particular interest, though Sarah had no idea of this connection. The next morning brought new challenges that would test not only Sarah's physical abilities, but also her courage to reveal the truth about what she had been hiding. As the sun rose over Fort Harrison, Sarah had no idea that her secret was about to be exposed in a way she never could have imagined, and that the revelation would change everything she thought she knew about her place in the military. The fourth week of training began with an announcement that would change everything for Sarah and her fellow recruits. Staff Sergeant Rivera gathered the group in the main training hall, her expression more serious than usual. Listen up, trainees. Today we're conducting uniform inspections, and I mean thorough inspections. This includes checking for unauthorized tattoos, jewelry, or any other violations of military dress code. Everyone will be required to wear regulation T-shirts for the remainder of today's activities. Sarah's heart dropped into her stomach. She had planned to speak with Rivera privately, but now she was being forced to reveal her secret in front of everyone. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked around at her fellow trainees, most of whom seemed unconcerned about the inspection. Private Johnson noticed Sarah's nervous expression and grinned maliciously. Looks like someone's about to get busted for breaking the rules. I bet she's got some trashy tattoo she's been hiding this whole time. As the recruits filed back to their barracks to change into regulation T-shirts, Sarah lingered behind. She approached Staff Sergeant Rivera with obvious reluctance. "Drill Sergeant, I need to speak with you privately about the uniform inspection." Rivera turned to face her, noticing the anxiety in Sarah's voice. "What is it, Martinez?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I have a tattoo on my left arm, Drill Sergeant. I've been covering it with long sleeves because I wasn't sure about the regulations. I can explain the meaning behind it, if you'll allow me." Rivera's expression softened slightly. She had suspected something like this, and she appreciated Sarah's honesty. "Show me." With shaking hands, Sarah rolled up her left sleeve, revealing the intricate military insignia tattoo. Rivera's eyes widened as she examined the detailed artwork. The insignia was immediately recognizable to anyone with military experience, but seeing it on a trainee was highly unusual. "Martinez, where did you get this tattoo? This isn't something you just pick off a wall at a tattoo parlor." Sarah's voice became stronger as she explained the meaning behind her tattoo. "My brother Marcus served in Special Operations, Drill Sergeant. He earned this insignia during his deployment. He was killed in action 2 years ago, and I got this tattoo to honor his memory and his service." Rivera studied the tattoo more carefully. The craftsmanship was exceptional, and every detail of the insignia was perfect. She could see that this wasn't a casual decision, but something deeply meaningful to Sarah. "Martinez, I understand why you got this tattoo, and I respect the sentiment behind it. However, displaying military insignia that you haven't earned yourself is a serious violation of military protocol. You're going to need to cover this during the inspection, and we'll need to discuss this matter with higher command." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She had known this moment would come eventually, but she hadn't been prepared for how exposed and vulnerable it would make her feel. As the uniform inspection began, Sarah had managed to find a way to partially cover her tattoo with makeup and strategic positioning. However, she knew that the secret was out among the instructors, and it was only a matter of time before word spread. During the inspection, Colonel Harrison made an unexpected appearance. He walked through the ranks of trainees with Staff Sergeant Rivera, observing their presentation and asking occasional questions. When he reached Sarah, he paused for a moment longer than usual. "Martinez, isn't it?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of his rank. "Yes, sir," Sarah responded, standing rigidly at attention. Colonel Harrison studied her face carefully. "You look familiar. What's your brother's name?" Sarah was surprised by the question, but answered immediately. "Marcus Martinez, sir. He served in Special Operations until he was killed in action 2 years ago." The colonel's expression changed subtly, and Rivera noticed the shift immediately. "I knew your brother, Martinez. He was a good soldier and a better man. His loss was felt by everyone who served with him." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, but she fought to maintain her composure. "Thank you, sir." As the inspection continued, word about Sarah's tattoo began to spread among the other trainees. Private Johnson, ever eager to cause trouble, started making louder and more pointed comments. "I heard Martinez has been hiding some fake military tattoo under her sleeves. Probably thinks she's some kind of tough girl playing soldier." His comments grew bolder as more trainees gathered around during their break. "I bet she got that tattoo thinking it would make her look cool. Stolen valor much?" Sarah tried to ignore the taunts, but each comment felt like a physical blow. These people didn't understand what the tattoo meant to her or the sacrifice it represented. They saw only what they wanted to see, making assumptions about her character and her motivations. The situation escalated when Johnson decided to confront Sarah directly. During afternoon training, he deliberately bumped into her during a drill exercise. "So Martinez, when are you going to show us all this fake military ink you've been hiding? We all want to see what kind of poser we've been training with." Other trainees began to gather, sensing drama. Some looked genuinely curious, while others seemed eager for entertainment. Sarah found herself at the center of unwanted attention, feeling more isolated than she had since arriving at the base. Staff Sergeant Rivera noticed the commotion and quickly intervened, but the damage was done. The group dynamic had shifted, and Sarah could feel the judgment and suspicion from her fellow recruits. She had become the outsider, the one with something to hide, the one who didn't belong. That evening, as Sarah sat alone in the mess hall, she questioned whether joining the military had been the right decision. She had come here hoping to honor her brother's memory and find a sense of purpose, but instead she felt like she was dishonoring both Marcus and herself. What Sarah didn't know was that Colonel Harrison had spent the afternoon making phone calls and reviewing records. The next day would bring revelations that would completely change how everyone viewed her tattoo and her right to wear it. The truth about Marcus Martinez and his service record was about to come to light in a way that would silence the critics and reveal the real story behind the insignia on Sarah's arm. The harassment intensified over the next 2 days. Private Johnson had recruited several other trainees to join in his campaign against Sarah, turning mealtimes and free periods into exercises in public humiliation. They would make loud comments about fake soldiers and stolen valor whenever she was within earshot, ensuring that everyone knew they were talking about her. "Hey Martinez," Johnson called out during evening chow, "my cousin thinks he recognizes that tattoo design from some online catalog. Says anyone can buy those fake military designs for $20. That true?" The mess hall grew quiet as heads turned towards Sarah's table. She continued eating her dinner, trying to maintain her dignity while her stomach churned with anxiety and anger. She wanted to defend herself, to explain what the tattoo really meant, but she knew that anything she said would only provide more ammunition for her tormentors. Private Chun, who had been one of the quieter recruits, surprised everyone by speaking up. "Maybe we should mind our own business and focus on our own training instead of worrying about someone else's tattoo." Johnson turned his attention to Chun immediately. "Oh, so now we're defending liars? You want to be friends with someone who's making a mockery of military service?" The tension in the mess hall was palpable. Other trainees looked uncomfortable, torn between not wanting to get involved and feeling that the situation had gone too far. Sarah appreciated Chen's support, but she didn't want him to become a target as well. Staff Sergeant Rivera had been observing the situation from across the room. She could see that the group dynamics were becoming toxic and that Sarah's emotional state was deteriorating. More importantly, she had received word that Colonel Harrison wanted to address the entire training group the following morning about military traditions and respect. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the whispered conversations around her. Some of the trainees were discussing whether she should be removed from the program, while others debated the appropriateness of tattoos in general. She felt completely alone, surrounded by people who had judged her without knowing her story. She thought about Marcus and the last conversation they had before his final deployment. He had told her to be strong, to never let anyone make her ashamed of who she was or what she believed in. But right now, she felt anything but strong. She felt like a fraud, even though she knew her intentions had been pure. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Instead of the usual morning formation, all trainees were ordered to report to the main auditorium. Colonel Harrison stood at the front of the room with several other officers, including Staff Sergeant Rivera and a man Sarah didn't recognize wearing dress blues with multiple ribbons and badges. "Good morning, trainees," Colonel Harrison began, his voice carrying throughout the room. "Today we're going to discuss military traditions, the significance of military insignia, and the importance of understanding the stories behind the symbols we wear and the people who earn them." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She had a sinking feeling that this presentation was somehow connected to her situation, though she couldn't imagine how. "Before we begin," the colonel continued, "I want to introduce Major Thompson, who served in Special Operations for 15 years before retiring last month. Major Thompson has agreed to share some stories about the men and women who have earned the right to wear certain insignia through their service and sacrifice." Major Thompson stepped forward, and Sarah noticed immediately that he wore the same insignia that was tattooed on her arm. Her heart began racing as she realized where this presentation was heading. "The insignia you see on my uniform," Major Thompson began, "represents one of the most challenging and dangerous assignments in military service. It's not awarded lightly, and it's not something anyone can simply decide they deserve. It must be earned through demonstrated courage, exceptional skill, and often significant personal sacrifice." Johnson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had been expecting a general discussion about military regulations, not a detailed presentation about specific insignia and their meanings. "I want to tell you about one particular soldier who earned this insignia," Major Thompson continued. "His name was Marcus Martinez, and he saved my life and the lives of 6 other soldiers during a mission that went wrong in hostile territory." Sarah felt as though all the air had been sucked out of the room. She gripped the edges of her chair and tried to keep her expression neutral, but inside, her emotions were churning like a storm. Major Thompson's voice grew more intense as he continued. "Sergeant Martinez was part of a reconnaissance team that was ambushed during what should have been a routine intelligence gathering mission. When our communications were cut and we were pinned down by enemy fire, Martinez made the decision to leave our defensive position and single-handedly take out the enemy machine gun nest that was preventing our extraction." The auditorium was completely silent now. Even Johnson had stopped his usual fidgeting and was listening intently to the story. "Martinez knew it was essentially a suicide mission," Major Thompson said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But he also knew that if he didn't act, all 7 of us would die in that valley. He managed to destroy the enemy position, but he was mortally wounded in the process. His actions allowed the rest of us to survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but she made no move to wipe them away. She had never heard the details of how Marcus had died, only that he had been killed in action while serving his country. Sergeant Marcus Martinez was posthumously awarded the Silver Star for his heroism that day, Major Thompson announced. He was 24 years old, and he left behind parents who were proud of his service and a younger sister who idolized him. Colonel Harrison stepped forward again, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Sarah. "The reason I'm sharing this story with you today is that Sergeant Martinez's sister is sitting in this room right now, and some of you have been giving her grief about a tattoo that honors her brother's memory and his ultimate sacrifice for his fellow soldiers." The auditorium erupted in shocked murmurs as heads turned to look at Sarah. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, but for the first time since arriving at the base, she wasn't ashamed. Instead, she felt a surge of pride for her brother and gratitude for these officers who had taken the time to tell his story. Johnson's face had turned pale as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. The tattoo he had been mocking as fake or stolen valor was actually a tribute to a genuine war hero. He had been ridiculing the sister of a man who had died, saving other soldiers' lives. Colonel Harrison's voice cut through the murmurs. "Private Martinez, please stand up." Sarah rose from her seat, her back straight, and her head held high for the first time in weeks. She was no longer hiding or apologizing for her connection to military service. She was proud to be Marcus Martinez's sister, and she was proud of the tattoo that honored his memory. Colonel Harrison's voice commanded absolute attention as Sarah stood before her fellow trainees. The silence in the auditorium was so complete that the sound of air conditioning seemed loud in comparison. "Private Martinez," the colonel said, "would you please show everyone the tattoo that some people in this room have been mocking?" Sarah nodded and carefully rolled up her left sleeve, revealing the intricate military insignia that had been the source of so much controversy. Under the bright auditorium lights, every detail of the tattoo was clearly visible to the entire group. Major Thompson stepped closer to examine the tattoo, and his expression showed genuine surprise. "This is remarkable work," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Every detail is perfect, down to the smallest elements that most people would never notice. This wasn't done by someone who just copied a picture from the internet." He turned to address the group. "The level of accuracy in this tattoo tells me that whoever designed it had intimate knowledge of what this insignia represents. They knew not just how it looked, but what each element symbolized." Sarah found her voice for the first time since the presentation began. "My brother drew the design himself before his last deployment, sir. He said he wanted me to have something that would remind me of what he was fighting for, even if he didn't come back." The emotional weight of her words settled over the room. Many of the trainees looked uncomfortable, particularly those who had participated in or silently supported the harassment campaign against her. Colonel Harrison nodded solemnly. "Your brother was not only a hero on the battlefield, but he was also clearly a thoughtful and caring brother who wanted to leave you with something meaningful." He then turned his attention to the rest of the group, and his tone became significantly more stern. "Now, I want to address the behavior that some of you have exhibited toward Private Martinez over the past few days." Johnson visibly winced, knowing that he was about to face consequences for his actions. "Military service is built on principles of honor, respect, and brotherhood," the colonel continued. "When you attack a fellow service member without understanding their story, when you make assumptions about their character or their motivations, you are violating the very foundation of what it means to be part of this military family." He began pacing in front of the group, his commanding presence filling the space. "Private Johnson, stand up." Johnson reluctantly rose from his seat, his face red with embarrassment and shame. "Private Johnson, you have spent the better part of a week publicly humiliating a fellow trainee, calling her a liar, and questioning her integrity. You did this without making any effort to understand the truth behind what you were criticizing. How do you think that reflects on your character as a future soldier?" Johnson's voice was barely audible. "Not well, sir." "That's correct," Colonel Harrison replied sharply. "Your behavior has been completely unacceptable and counter to everything we try to instill in our service members. You will be meeting with me privately this afternoon to discuss the consequences of your actions." The colonel then addressed the entire group again. "Let me be absolutely clear about something. Private Martinez is not wearing stolen valor. She is not pretending to have earned something she didn't. She is honoring the memory of a brother who gave his life for this country and for his fellow soldiers." Major Thompson stepped forward again. "I want you all to understand something about the insignia on Private Martinez's arm. I knew Marcus Martinez personally. I serve alongside him, and I was there when he earned this insignia through actions that saved lives at the cost of his own. When I look at that tattoo, I don't see someone trying to claim unearned honor. I see his sister who loved her brother and wanted to carry his legacy with her." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the support she was receiving from these officers. For weeks, she had felt isolated and ashamed, but Now she realized that her concerns about the tattoo had been misplaced. She wasn't dishonoring military tradition. She was upholding it in her own way. Staff Sergeant Rivera addressed the group next. This situation has revealed some serious character flaws among some of you that we need to address immediately. Military service requires you to support your fellow service members, not tear them down based on assumptions and gossip. She looked directly at several trainees who had participated in the harassment. If you cannot show basic respect and human decency to your fellow trainees, how can we trust you to have each other's backs in combat situations where lives depend on your integrity and loyalty? The message was clear and powerful. The trainees who had joined in mocking Sarah were now facing the realization that their behavior could affect their future military careers. Colonel Harrison returned his attention to Sarah. Private Martinez, I want you to know that your brother would be proud of the way you've conducted yourself throughout this ordeal. Despite facing unfair treatment, you've maintained your dignity and continue to focus on your training. That shows the same kind of character that made your brother a hero. He paused for a moment before continuing. However, I do need to address the regulation issue regarding your tattoo. While I completely understand and support the sentiment behind it, displaying military insignia that you haven't personally earned does violate military protocol. Sarah's heart sank slightly, thinking she was about to be punished despite the support she had received. That said, the colonel continued, given the extraordinary circumstances and the true meaning behind your tattoo, I'm prepared to make an exception. You may continue to display your tattoo as a tribute to your brother's service and sacrifice. The relief Sarah felt was overwhelming. She had been prepared to cover the tattoo permanently if necessary, but being allowed to keep it visible felt like a validation of everything she had been feeling about Marcus's memory. Major Thompson had one final surprise. Private Martinez, I have something that belonged to your brother that I think you should have. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small military coin, the kind often given to recognize exceptional service. Marcus gave this to me after our successful mission, the one before his final deployment. He said it was his lucky coin and that he wanted me to have it as a thank you for being a good leader. Sarah accepted the coin with trembling hands, feeling a tangible connection to her brother that she hadn't experienced since his death. I think Marcus would want his sister to have it now, Major Thompson said with a gentle smile. As the presentation concluded and the trainees were dismissed, Sarah found herself surrounded by fellow recruits who approached her with apologies and expressions of support. The dynamic in the group had completely shifted, and she no longer felt like an outsider. The weeks following the revelation transformed Sarah's experience at Fort Harrison completely. What had once been a source of shame and secrecy became a symbol of pride and connection to her fellow trainees. Her tattoo, now displayed openly, served as a conversation starter rather than a source of ridicule. Private Chin approached her during evening chow, carrying his tray to her table. Mind if I sit with you? I've been wanting to ask about your brother's service, if you're comfortable talking about it. Sarah smiled, appreciating his respectful approach. Of course. I'm glad people want to know about Marcus now. Over the following days, many of her fellow trainees sought her out, genuinely interested in learning about her brother's story and expressing their regret for the way she had been treated. The mess hall conversations that had once been filled with mockery now included discussions about military history, family sacrifice, and the different ways people honor fallen service members. Private Johnson's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. After his private meeting with Colonel Harrison, he had been assigned extra duties and required to write a formal letter of apology to Sarah. But, more than the punishment, he seemed genuinely remorseful about his behavior. Martinez, he said one morning after formation, I know my apology letter was required, but I wanted to tell you in person how sorry I am. I had no right to judge you or make assumptions about something I didn't understand. Sarah studied his face, seeing genuine regret in his expression. I appreciate that, Johnson. We all make mistakes when we don't have the full picture. Is there anything I could do to make up for how I acted? He asked. Sarah considered his question. Just remember this lesson when you encounter situations in the future where you might be tempted to judge someone without knowing their story. The incident had also caught the attention of base personnel beyond the training unit. Sarah found herself invited to speak at a ceremony honoring fallen soldiers, where she shared Marcus's story and talked about different ways families cope with military loss. Staff Sergeant Rivera pulled her aside after the ceremony. "Martinez, you handled that beautifully. You have a gift for speaking about difficult topics in a way that honors both the fallen and the living." "Thank you, Drill Sergeant. It felt good to share Marcus's story with people who could appreciate what he did." "Rivera Smaid, I've been thinking about your future beyond basic training. Have you considered military communications or public affairs? Your ability to connect with people and tell meaningful stories could be valuable to the service." Sarah hadn't considered those career paths, but Rivera's suggestion sparked her interest. She had always been good at writing and speaking, skills that had helped her get through college before enlisting. As her training progressed, Sarah excelled not only in physical and tactical exercises, but also in leadership scenarios. Her experience dealing with adversity had strengthened her character, and other trainees began looking to her for guidance and support during challenging situations. Major Thompson visited the base again near the end of basic training, specifically to check on Sarah's progress. During their conversation, he shared more stories about Marcus that helped fill in gaps in Sarah's understanding of her brother's military service. "Your brother talked about you constantly," Major Thompson told her. "He was so proud of your college degree and worried about how you were handling his deployment. He would have been amazed to see you following in his footsteps." "I never planned to join the military," Sarah admitted. "But after he died, I felt lost. I needed something that would give me purpose and help me feel connected to what he believed in." He would understand that completely. Marcus always said that service comes in many forms, but it always requires sacrifice and commitment to something larger than yourself. During the final week of basic training, Colonel Harrison announced that Sarah had been selected as the honor graduate for her training class. The designation recognized not only her performance during training, but also her character and leadership potential. As she stood before her fellow graduates during the ceremony, wearing her dress uniform with the tattoo visible on her arm, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first day when she had stepped off the bus in fear and uncertainty. "This honor belongs not just to me," she said during her brief speech, "but to all the family members who have supported us, all the service members who came before us, and especially to those who paid the ultimate price for the freedoms we defend." She looked down at her tattoo, thinking of Marcus. "My brother taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do what's right despite being afraid. That lesson guided me through the challenges of basic training, and it will guide me throughout my military career." After the ceremony, Sarah's parents arrived for the graduation celebration. They had driven 12 hours to be there, and Sarah could see the pride in their eyes as they met her fellow graduates and instructors. Her mother touched the tattoo gently. "Marcus will be so proud of you, Mija. You found a way to honor his memory while creating your own path." As Sarah prepared to move on to her advanced training, she carried with her not only the technical skills she had learned, but also valuable lessons about courage, integrity, and the importance of supporting fellow service members through difficult times. Staff Sergeant Rivera offered her final assessment during Sarah's exit interview. "You came here carrying a burden of grief and uncertainty about whether you belonged in military service. You're leaving as a leader who understands that true strength comes from supporting others and staying true to your values, even when it's difficult." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. "I understand now that my brother's legacy isn't just about the heroic actions he took, but about the values he lived by every day. I want to carry those values forward in my own service." As she packed her belongings and prepared to leave Fort Harrison, Sarah looked at her reflection in the mirror. The tattoo on her arm no longer felt like a secret to be hidden or a burden to be carried alone. Instead, it had become a bridge connecting her to her brother's memory to her fellow service members, and to her own sense of purpose and belonging in the military community. The young woman who had arrived at basic training feeling lost and uncertain was leaving as a confident soldier ready to serve her country with honor, carrying forward the legacy of a brother who had taught her that true courage means standing up for what's right, even when the cost is high.